So, 106 students, we are winding down in the semester. Had to make some adjustments this semester due to some learning curve adjustments with going OER with the course. So you're going to find that the worst is definitely behind you at this point. So all I'm asking you to do for this week is to read through the information on inheritance. So inheritance, the concept of inheritance is that you can pass down information from one object to another. So like for example, a car is an automobile. Also you could say a truck is an automobile. A tank is an automobile. Actually, a tank might be a vehicle. So you might have a class called vehicle, which would pass down some attributes, characteristics, behaviors to automobiles. And then the automobile class would pass down some attributes, characteristics, behaviors to car. So you could say that all vehicles have some kind of color, but not all vehicles have more than one door or something, for example. So a tank has one way to get in, one way out, whereas actually maybe there's two ways out. I don't know. I've never been in a tank, but you could also argue that a typical car has two doors, four doors, and a trunk. So regardless, the idea with inheritance is that we are passing down traits, just like we as individuals inherit properties of our parents and our grandparents and characteristics and traits from our parents and grandparents. So the reading here is about inheritance. So just understand how inheritance works. So the class that is the superclass is kind of like our parents, and then we, the offspring, would be the subclass. So you can have, like for example here, Class A is passing down characteristics to Class D, which also passes down to E. So Class D is the superclass of Class E. Class A is also a superclass of E as well as of Class D. When we use inheritance, we use the keyword of extends. So you will see this in some literature as well as in some programs. So that idea is meaning that Class B is a subclass of the superclass A. So Class B is inheriting properties of A. So Class B is a Class A. That's what it is. You could say something like a grasshopper is an insect. A bee is an insect. But look, they even give you the example of vehicles. I didn't even realize they did that. So you can look through this literature and get a little bit better sense as to how this works. You could say, for example, a square is a rectangle. Of course, but a rectangle or square, a rectangle is not always a square. So a square would inherit properties of rectangles. So you can read through this literature. You should read through this literature to get a sense of what we're talking about with inheritance. And there's a lot of good literature on this. So inheritance is definitely a end of 106 concept. You will definitely see it if there's more programming in your future. So you'll see the keyword of super, and that is referring to the parent class. So you'll also see the keyword of this. We may have seen this before when we talked about object creation. So the keyword this it's so abstract to really understand. So we see the keyword of this, and we want to make sure we are referring to the instance of the object we are working with at that moment. So like for example, they're saying that we have a student that has a requirement as a parameter for a name. So when we create a student, we're saying that the name, this variable name coming in, that's this thing right here. This is a variable, it's a parameter that's being used here. But every student has a requirement for a name. So we're saying for this student, his or her name, so this thing right here, this thing refers to this. So we're saying when we create one of these things, when we create one of these students, this student's name, his or her name, this student's name is going to be what is being sent when the constructor is called. So you'll see the keyword of this in other examples as well. I apologize for any noise that's in the background. I've got a lot going on here in my house today, so I want to try to make these videos to keep you guys moving ahead. So apologize if you hear any music playing or anything in the background. Hopefully it won't be too disruptive. So you can see also some other similar objects or concepts, I should say, that are available in Java that are similar to inheritance is that of an interface, and you might also see that of an abstract class. So there's a lot of good stuff here with information on inheritance, but the big thing to make sure that you take away is that you understand the concept of inheritance as to, like here example, this object called deck, it is a card collection. So that's a good example of something a little bit more tangible that you might understand. We hopefully have an understanding of what a deck of cards is, and then there's some more information here on some examples that are provided to you by the course coordinator on inheritance itself. Alright, so I'm not going to ask that you do, there's a lab that, or an exercise that's supposed to go with inheritance. I'm not going to ask that you do that. I think for an online course it's a little bit raw to try to do that, especially given the other limitations we've had this semester. Sorry, I got to turn this stuff on and off so I can get to what I need to. Right, and then we also are introduced to that of a graphical user interface called JavaFX. So you want to make sure you read through this information on JavaFX. The acronym GUI stands for Graphical User Interface. Graphical User Interface is GUI. So you've been doing some GUI stuff, but we've been using JOption panes and dialog boxes and windows of that nature, which is kind of cool. You might remember back when you did that IP address thing, you did that, and you've done it for the sandwich thing. Some other things you've done it with, which is kind of cool. But this is a much more full-blown utility of what we can do with graphics with Java. So Java's going through a couple different generations of this. Some previous ways to do graphics with Java is a thing called AWT, stands for Abstract Window Toolkit, and then there's another thing called Java Swing. So you might see some information regarding AWT and Java Swing, which are still out there and still widely used. Several years ago, they released this new way to do graphics in Java called JavaFX. So JavaFX is actually something that is still a little new to me, but it is really, once you get used to it, it's really cool to work with. You can do a lot of CSS web styling with it. So once you get used to it, there's a lot of neat things you can do with it. I personally find it's a little bit finicky to get started with, but once you get used to it, there's some cool stuff you can do. So there's lots of literature available from Oracle's website itself on how to work with JavaFX. So you should read through this information if you're familiar with JavaFX. Essentially what you're looking at with JavaFX, and this is really the case with any kind of graphical tool, and most programming languages actually, is you're going to be dealing with, essentially Java is going to have to create a window pane, if you will. So you can see here, it's going to create this thing called a scene, and then there's, let me see if I can show you an example. Not really quite the graphic I was looking for. So this is kind of a good example. So here you can see we have like a dialog box, and we can put onto this window, so this whole window, we can add onto it different components or objects themselves. So like these radio buttons themselves, this high, medium, low thing, this can be put into like a grouping which is added to this window. And sometimes you can have applications that have other layers in between those two things. So just be aware that most graphical tools pretty much work the same way, where you have some kind of window pane that actually has other content areas or components added to it. And that's kind of what they're talking about here as you go through. I'm trying to find some better examples to show you what I'm talking about. Well, they kind of talk about that here, but it doesn't really give you a good example. So what you're going to be asked to do, what I'm going to ask that you do, and this is extreme, it should be pretty straightforward, is I'm going to ask that you create this application. And I am totally fine if you copy and paste it, although I certainly hope the bigger takeaway is that you understand what's happening here. So you notice that we have a ton of imports for JavaFX. So I'm going to explain this a little bit more in a specific video on what to do with this assignment. But with JavaFX, like most graphical tools, you have some kind of, in this case they call it a scene, or it might be like a window. And on this scene we put a stage, and then we go from there. We can add things to that. So we'll come back to this here in another video, but just you want to read through the information on JavaFX, get a sense of what you can do with it. There's lots of examples. Start to play around with this. I'm just going to ask for your assignment you do a very simple example of it, but this is definitely where you want to go, especially if you are planning to do more with programming. You want to try to expand your knowledge on how to create graphics. This is way more than just on J-option dialog boxes and stuff, because now you can start to create some full-blown applications that you are familiar with. Let me give you a better example here. Like, here's a very simple form where the user can enter their name and a password. So this is the kind of thing we're familiar with. These are the graphical applications we're more familiar with. You would say, well, that's like a J-option dialog box. Well, yeah, it is, but you can actually, as a developer, you can style what this looks like and how it, what colors and the formatting and the location and the centering. And so you can control what this looks like. You can also add a lot more utilities to this, like buttons and checkboxes and drop-down lists and sliders and all kinds of stuff you can add to it. Alright, so the only other thing that you have for this week, sorry about this, I gotta turn edit mode back on. So the only thing you have for this week is a discussion forum, so you want to make sure you wrap that up. So the assignments that I'm going to ask you to do is this JavaFX assignment and the discussion board. Notice that I'm moving this lab to the final week of the course. So, as always, email me with questions, and I'll see you in a video where I explain this JavaFX lab.